Hey, this is Steve Guttenberg, and I am the audiophiliac. But this guy over here, he's Herb Reichert. He was the first audiophiliac for the day, and now he's back for a repeat performance. And what we're doing is we're both kind of hung up on horn speakers right now. But I'm kind of new to horns. I've never really, well, I've reviewed them, but not in depth. But Herb's lived with them for literally for decades, right? I mean, you're in deep into horns. Decade, okay. So what's the magic? What is it that horns do that every other kind of speaker can't do? Put it that way. Put you on the spot.
Well, what's kind of more interesting is like why they disappeared. I've spent a lot of time recently, once in France, listening to the first speakers ever by Western Electric, the first Western 555 driver, the 12A, the 13A, and you go, wait a minute, I've never heard anything this good before. And then somebody goes, well, that was the first speaker, and they were making it for talking movies. And the idea was voice articulation, that you could hear the dialogue. Now, audiophile speakers, like especially after Edgar Vulture, and you have like little dome tweeters and woofers and little wooden boxes, they kind of like, rah, rah, rah. They don't speak with the same level of clarity, but they do a lot of other things. They make bass, they fit on your bookshelf, and they disappear in a kind of home-friendly way. You don't need a theater or a church or a big space. And the marketplace sort of dissolved the speaker thing with one long-standing exception, and that's Klipsch, which was started, and I'm still amazed with them. Their first Klipsch horn was 1946. Right. So this is America. It's in Hope, Arkansas. It's post-war, and we're like, wow, in America. And the horn speaker he invented that year, the Klipsch horn, it's still in production.
Absolutely. I love the story that the dealers were saying, Paul, it's a great speaker, but it's kind of big. Can't you make something smaller? And his reaction was, I didn't realize my job was to make things smaller. I thought my job was to make a great sounding speaker. Now you're telling me it has to be smaller. And they say, yeah, it should be smaller. So by 1957, he got around to making the Heresy. And the Heresy was called the Heresy because it was a heresy that he had to make something smaller to appease his dealers and customers. And that speaker, the Heresy, is now called the Heresy 3, and it's still in production, 1957, 2018, with only 2 changes since the original design. That's freaking amazing. That is just so amazing.
Is it true what I heard, that it was originally designed as a center channel?
Yeah, he was into 3-channel stereo. So in the 50s, 3-channel stereo looked like it was going to happen, and that was the other reason. So it was a center speaker.
I remember seeing a picture of Frank Sinatra's listening room, and he had 3 channels.
He had 3-channel stereo, yeah. It's pretty amazing. Remember, we went to Harry Weisfeld's house. Remember, like 2 years ago? Right. And he had 3-channel stereo. He had, what was his preamp? It was like a Harman, something, a Citation, something.
That's my brain, too many blows to that. I can't
But remember, he had a 3-channel preamp and 3 mono amps.
That's right.
So he basically had a recreation of, I think it was a Citation 3-channel preamp.
I'm a big fan today of 2-channel mono. Where the image appears deep in the space between, which, by the way, people think horns don't image. Well, we make these little boxes with these little, little domes vibrating around so they can image. But horn speakers actually, at the right distances, very much like a dome tweeter, they image unbelievably well. But people don't really, audiophiles in particular, seem to have a prejudice against horns. They think they sound like this.
Right.
But I always feel like box speakers, and I'm not, I don't advocate horns. I review all kinds. I always think box speakers sound like my cell phone, like it's like watching a movie on my cell phone. They just sound like little table radios, Oh, we got 2 of them, isn't that cute? Sitting on a stand. But You know what I mean, right,
Yeah,
Steve?
yeah, absolutely. No, I am blown away. I mean, where I thought you were going was our mutual obsession now with near-field monitoring, and my quote breakthrough is not to have it on a desk, which is, I've always had that on my computer, near-field monitors, but to actually put them on speaker stands, so the speakers are in free space, so there's no bounce off the wall behind them, or no side walls, in my room at least. I'm sitting about 4 feet away from the speakers. The speakers are about 5 feet apart from each other. And talk about a center image. It is so solid. I've never heard an image like that. The speakers, the cliche, they disappear. They really, really, really disappear. And it's freaky amazing. And when I'm playing stereo, because I am a stereo guy, there's depth like I've never had before from any system I've ever heard in my home. Because the thing is, I'm hearing the percentage of direct sound from the speakers is so much higher than it is normally when you're 10 feet away from the speaker, or 8 feet away from the speaker. You're hearing reflections from everything. But with horns, they automatically, by design, minimize those reflections because they're more directive than they're more directional than a direct radiating speaker.
I used to look. I made a study of like the old literature for Altec horns. And one of the things that always baffled me, they never mentioned sensitivity. You know, like, oh, is it 100 dB sensitive? No, they said coverage. And by coverage, they would show you a diagram of the angle of dispersion across a large room, like a church or an auditorium. And then they'd go, instead of efficiency or sensitivity, they'd say how many people you can have in the room. So instead of like 92 dBs at 1 watt, 1 meter, they'd say 500 to 800 people.
That's fine.
An interesting spec, right, that we've sort of lost track of.
Here's a funny story about directivity and directional speakers. So there was this movie theater, I used to be a movie theater projectionist. There was this movie theater called the 8th Street Playhouse, right near 6th Avenue in New York City. And a bunch of young projectionists wound up buying this theater. But they didn't have any money. And the theaters, they had projectors in the theater, but they didn't have any speakers or sound system. So they cobbled together their own home hi-fi. They took the stuff out of their house.
And hooked up to the theater horns?
Right, and here's what you learn. If you put a normal box speaker behind a screen in a movie theater that holds 400 people, it sounds freaking awful because it can't, you have to play it so loud because it's just spreading sound everywhere as opposed to a horn speaker, which is behind the screen of every real movie theater. So it just was a disaster. And they blew up the speaker within days because it just couldn't fill that space and couldn't be heard. So yeah, horns do it easily. Matter of fact, I had this friend who was the chief projectionist at Radio City. And when he got there in like 1970, Radio City is 6,000 seats, huge space. And they used...
In a movie theater?
In a movie theater. Yeah, Radio City is a movie theater, 6,000 seats.
Oh, right.
And they had, for the power amplifiers, they had some Western Electric amplifier that was 8 or 10 watts. Now they weren't playing,
My former partner bought all that
Right.
stuff from those people.
But the funny thing is that, you know, this 8 or 10 watt amplifier it wasn't like rock loud. It wasn't loud like movies are today, but it was certainly loud enough that you could fill this theater with three big horn speakers behind the screen with 3 8 or 10 watt amplifiers. How's that for sensitivity?
I know. Well, but the thing is, we're both, reviewing a loudspeaker that's a horn, and it's by Klipsch, and it's small. Maybe it's that small.
Right.
And I'm just like, I'm struggling with why people haven't paid any attention to this. The question that really I don't have an answer for other than audiophiles just drove the car down a certain road and never turned around and looked at some other alternatives. Right. But I'm really questioning 30 years or more of people just, the same could be said about old quads as well. But it seems we've really committed body and soul and mind to to box speakers.
Well,
I'm not quite understanding why that commitment is.
I think there's just a prejudice against horn speakers. But beyond that is that there's only Klipsch, there's Avant-Garde, there's not that in the whole world, JBL, there's not that many companies that make horn speakers, because designing a good horn is really hard, and it can't be done by most small audiophile companies. Klipsch is still a pretty big company.
Yeah, you were saying they have 3 anechoic chambers?
Yeah.
I mean, how many anechoic chambers that measure loudspeakers are there in North America, probably?
Right. So, you know, most speaker companies, like Wilson, I doubt Wilson Audio has an anechoic chamber. Magico doesn't have an anechoic chamber, but Klipsch does. One of those, by the way, was possibly designed by Paul Klipsch himself. That's a chamber that's small. It's just for measuring and evaluating horn drivers.
And it's small?
So they attach the horn to the end of this box, and then there's all this absorbent inside the box. So that's the quote anechoic chamber, the 3rd anechoic chamber, as I remember. I might
and they probably put a bunch of microphones in it and measured dispersion.
Yeah. So they showed it to me, but it was basically a large box. But I will, if that story I did about Klipsch for Home Theater Magazine is still on the internet, I'll just link to it for this
and
video.
I'll read it.
But anyway, it's just fun. It's fun, it's exciting, and I've reviewed horn speakers before, but I've just really charged up right now. I'm really connecting with it, and I'm thrilled. Because there's life to it, there's energy to it. And when you live with a horn speaker for a week or two as a reviewer, and then you go to a normal box speaker,
I just did
it
that
just
this
sounds
morning.
so clamped down and dead and lifeless. The contrast is huge.
I want to point out, okay, so in this story I'm writing about horns, I mentioned at the beginning, like if you've ever driven a high performance, like race type car, you know, if the clutch is, you know, in and the engine isn't loaded, and you touch the throttle on a race car engine, the tachometer just whomp, whomp. The engine just revs without any effort whatsoever. And you do that on the race car. You drive the race car, it throws your back in the seat. It, you know, pins you, makes you, you know, heady, and you can feel the adrenaline. And then you get in your Hyundai Elantra or something, and you rev it before you put it in gear, and it's like a tuberculin mouse or something, you know. It's like pathetic. And that sometimes, for me, these horns that I'm listening to now, they just rev so effortlessly. And I believe that rate of change, the ear and the mind are really sensitive to rate of change, more than frequency response.
I agree.
And I think that's I'm guessing right now that that's part of the joy of horns. They just rev so well.
I think that's it. I think that's a good place to stop, too. So thank you, Herb. He is the audiophiliac for the day, for the 2nd time. He's the world champion. And hope to see you guys back here really soon. Thanks so much for watching.
Bye-bye.